All right, everyone, let's get this show on the road. And thank you again for joining me. Welcome to episode 35 of This Week is Live. I'm your host, Raymond Flotat of MXDWN.com. That's Mixdown. So glad to see you well. Thanks for joining us. There's just an insane amount of things happening in the world. And most pertinently to last week's canceled broadcast, I just recovered from being sick. I'm going to say something. It's not going to be super controversial. Being sick sucks a lot. And in a crazy, messed up world, there really isn't the time to worry about having to contend with feeling terrible or like your head's going to implode or you can't stop coughing. And thankfully, it wasn't COVID. It wasn't anything like that. I would say probably some just unusual formulation of a cold. But aggravating as hell, came up right before last week's broadcast, had all kinds of stuff planned and just had to scrap it. There's nothing to be done. So thankfully recovered, here to go, and there is an avalanche of stuff that's happening out there. So we're going to get into all of that. We've got all kinds of great stories for you here today and a lot of bad news, unfortunately, too. Today, as a way of a programming note, kind of like how in the previous show, in the previous episode, we had our Let's Play video featuring the four of us playing Creatures of the Late Afternoon, the board game / album that Kick Wall created. This week, we're going to have the first of many different and interesting pieces of content that are going to happen, which effectively is going to be an interview. So this is something I've been teasing for quite a while. We have a whole mess of interviews that we've done, and we're going to be airing them as a part of this broadcast. And we'll be doing probably one per week over the next several weeks. Many of them come from content that we created at Summer Game Fest last month, which was a blast, and we've talked about that a lot on this show. But in today's episode, at the end, what we're going to have is a long interview that I did just prior to getting sick last week with a very talented actor, actress, voice actress, Anjali Bhimani. And we're going to basically end the show with that. So we're going to have our regular recap of headlines. There's going to be the editorial comment, and then we're going to go and basically bring you right to the long form of that interview. It's wonderful. She's very sweet, incredible, smart. Basically stayed 25 minutes over our allotted time because things were just going so well in the conversation. So let's dive right into it. And we're going to go right into a bevy of, unfortunately, very sad news. And leading right off the top, just coming on the heels of yesterday, the news of the passing of famed singer, songwriter Sinead O'Connor. Now, right now, as of this time, as of press time, there has been no cause of death stated. There hasn't been anything reported or released from the family. It is basically nothing more than she has passed on, has been indicated, the circumstances of that. And essentially, there is no foul play suspected. There's nothing, oogie like that in the mix. But what caused the death and what was the manner of her death right now isn't known, other than she passed away yesterday, June 26th. Now, Sinead O'Connor, for those of you that might be a little on the younger side, has been long a very big fixture in the world of pop culture and music. And effectively, first came to notoriety behind her famed album, The Lion and the Cobra, in 1987. And then most famously, behind a record that came out in 1990 called I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got. Now, this album featured a cover at the time of a very little known Prince song, a song he had done for a side project called The Family. Wasn't a song he really took seriously, and the song was called Nothing Compares to You. And effectively just runaway smash hit. Very sedate, kind of somber, quiet song, very reflective in the video. I mean, music videos were everything in those days, and basically music videos like really close frame shot kind of Sinead O'Connor's face and effectively her ultimately crying and kind of in like sepia tones, kind of dark, and was in 1990 was a massive runaway hit. It was a really sweet and sad song and a really impressive performance. And she kind of became a superstar very quickly behind that cover and its big success, and then won a bunch of awards, and then she didn't show up for the awards. And, Sinead O'Connor in those days was marked as being one of a handful of female musicians that, basically had a shaved head, or either, if not shaved head, very close crop head, and was very adamant about a lot of her political beliefs. And effectively, one of the things that came very early on into her success came in her first appearance on the show Saturday Night Live. This was on October 3rd, 1992. Now, apparently, all unbeknownst to the SNL staff and Lorne Michaels, Sinead O'Connor had essentially kind of planned that she was going to do a form of a protest, and she did an a cappella rendering of Bob Marley's song War, changing a lot of the lyrics to be about child abuse, and effectively kind of had a photo that she was kind of keeping close, and it turned out to be that the photo was of the Pope at that time in the world, the Pope, and then, at the end of the performance, basically pulled the photo out, ripped it up, and, said, "Fight the real enemies." And, this all happened on live television. Nobody really knew this was coming. It was one of those just very sudden real life moments. And effectively, nobody had any notion or expectation that this was going to become a thing. Now, essentially, it became a giant controversy. Now, Sinead O'Connor had aimed in this respect to have this be that this was kind of a protest of what she saw was a rise in sexual abuse and violence perpetrated by the Catholic Church. And this message went over like a lead balloon in its time. And basically, she became something of a pariah in the world as far as everything was concerned in coverage in the world, as far as what people thought about it. I mean, America was a decently religious country at that point. And the irony in all of this is that some years later, in the late 90s, it became very, very known that there was essentially, a rampant child abuse problem perpetrated by certain people coming from the Catholic Church. And it was something that was subject to a ton of reporting. There was a giant series of scandals. And of course, there's an argument to be made that a good portion of what has effectively become people's perception of the church has been kind of tarnished in the days since some of those things came to light. And so for a long time, what was a blooming career that Sinead O'Connor had turned into something where it was far, far, far less appreciated and lauded after. And essentially what happened just a small 13 days later, there was a big tribute concert for the 30th anniversary of Bob Dylan's work. And this was basically going to take place in Madison Square Garden. And so just 13 days later, she was one of the many people that were scheduled to sing at this event. And as she basically came out, she was introduced by Chris Christopherson. And if you haven't seen this piece of video, you should check it out because it's wild and scary and in its own way, very dark and sad. But effectively, comes out on stage, gets ready to sing a Bob Dylan song, and the crowd just won't stop booing. This is right in the wake of her tearing up the picture of the Pope. And, she kind of stops the band. And then after a moment of trying to give it a chance to die down to see if she could, she's obviously affected by it. She goes into, another rendition of Bob Marley's War, and then basically heads off the stage crying. And, Chris Christopherson gives her a hug and basically holds her. And, it's just this wild, like, people would not let her off the hook for it. Now, Sinead O'Connor went on for many, many years and continued to release albums and continued to put material out into the world. This wasn't anything that, like, basically halted her career. But as far as that, like, super mainstream success, that Grammy-winning success, that obviously went away in the wake after that. And interesting how in the world, as things have evolved, the point that she was trying to make, perhaps just far ahead of its time. And, a lot of people that were denizens and fans of things just kind of wouldn't let her forget it. So as time went on, she kept releasing albums and lots of different things kind of came to light, especially in the world of social media. Sinead O'Connor was not pulling any punches about who she was or her troubles. And she was incredibly open about struggles with depression, struggles with feelings of suicide. And then also, very recently, unfortunately, about 18 months ago, the death of her 17-year-old son. Now, no one knows if the passing of her son has anything to do with her passing now. It could be completely unrelated. Who knows? No one's really sure. But at any rate, a very inspirational voice who perhaps in her own way ahead of her time, lost way too early. Now, elsewhere, in another arena of kind of surprising and not so great news, the 1975 have become a very popular band in the world right now, and young people are gaga for what the 1975 are. And the band's lead singer, Matt Healy, has never really been shy about making statements about various things that he feels passionate about. And essentially, there was a festival that they were slated to perform. It was called the Good Vibes Festival, and it was taking place in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur. Now, Malaysia is one of the countries in the world where essentially it is basically considered to, be an anti-LGBTQ kind of nation. They have laws against being in gay relationships. They have laws against sodomy, and it is essentially stated as potential capital punishment behind it. And so it is a facet of that country and its government that is just not in accordance with what a lot of people here in the Western world might expect. And that's not the only place in the world that is like that. There are other countries that have laws that are that draconian and that seemingly regressive as far as what policies are and, just not being safe to be a person of LGBTQ origins. And, Matt Healy of the 1975 apparently was struggling with the mere fact that this was a thing and that this was even, still a thing and that they were being offered to play a festival. And they showed up to play the festival. Seemingly, maybe he was struggling with canceling and not playing it because of these laws that are on the books there. And, kind of went on stage and made this very long rant. And he said, "I'm fucking furious, and that's not fair to you because you're not representative of your government. Because you are young people, and I'm sure a lot of you are gay and progressive and cool. So I pulled the show yesterday, and we had a conversation. We said, you know what? We can't let the kids down because they're not the government. Fucking ridiculous to tell people that they can do with what, that, and that," pointing to his mouth and then pointing to his crotch. "If you want to invite me here to do a show, you can fuck off. I'll take your money. You can ban me, but I've done this before and it doesn't feel good and I'm fucked off." So in the immediate aftermath of that, the band's bassist, Ross MacDonald, walked up and him and Healy basically started making out for like 3-5 minutes. Then they proceeded to kind of play the show, and apparently someone backstage basically gave them the word that your show is canceled before they even got a chance to finish the show. And he came back and said, "All right, we just got banned from Kuala Lumpur. See you later." And just like that, the show was over. Not entirely surprisingly, given the state of the laws in Malaysia, the entire festival was canceled by the government not 24 hours later. So there were 2 more days of this festival. So this was like Friday night. They were the Friday night headliner of the 1975. And essentially, before anything else even had a chance to happen, the government stepped in and canceled the rest of the festival. And the festival, the Good Vibes Festival as it's called, interesting name considering everything that's happened. We deeply regret to announce that the remaining schedule of Good Vibes Festival 2023, GVF 2023, planned for today and tomorrow has been canceled following the controversial conduct and remarks made by UK artist Matt Healy from the band The 1975. This decision adheres to the immediate cancellation directive issued at 1:20 p.m. 22nd of July, 2023 by the Ministry of Communications and Digital. The ministry has underlined its unwavering stance against any parties that challenge, ridicule, or contravene Malaysian laws. We sincerely apologize to all of our ticket holders, vendors, sponsors, and partners. We are aware of the time, energy, and efforts you have put into making the festival a success, and we value your steadfast support. We will support you. We will update you on refund mechanics as soon as possible. We appreciate your understanding and continued support during this challenging time. So, everything, poof, gone. One person basically indicated an unhappiness with the state of play as far as laws were concerned in terms of those, I guess, basic human rights. And the whole thing is gone. It's canceled, just like that. Government basically punitively, even though the festival perhaps was not, in alignment, aware with what the band's statement was, the whole festival suffers. So it's times like this that I'm reminded, and I'm not trying to say yay America in any way, but you have to take stock of things and imagine that as bad as many things are in a lot of places everywhere and here in America, you don't hear about that kind of thing happening here in America. Someone doesn't walk on a festival stage and, make one kind of statement like that, and then the whole festival is canceled by the government. That's just crackers. And I can't imagine what it's like if you're a young person living in that country. I can't even imagine further what it's like if you're a, LGBTQ youth living in that country. If you're a person who's having to contend with living through that as an experience, I can't even imagine what that feels like. I can't imagine what that's like for you. And what that is just kind of the presence in your world. Also, moving on from there, and even also very crazy, controversial news, the country singer Jason Aldean released a new song a couple months back and effectively recently released a new video for it, and it's called Try That in a Small Town. Now, this video and the song that kind of underpins it, which I would like to point out, wasn't written by Jason Aldean. It was written by Kelly Lovelace, Neil Thrasher, Tully Kennedy, and Kurt Allison. So 4 different people wrote this song. Ultimately, music and lyrics, and Jason Aldean performed it and then, performed in the video for it. The video is basically kind of, the song in the video is basically an indictment of unruly or bad behavior, and, watch out and be careful. If you were to do such a thing in a small town in America, you might not get away with it. And the lyrics kind of speak for themselves, just to give you a tiny snippet of it. Cuss out a cop, spit in his face, stomp on the flag and light it up. Yeah, you think you're tough? We'll try that in a small town. See how far you make it. Down the road, around here, we take care of our own. You cross that line, it won't take long for you to find out. I recommend you don't. Try that in a small town. Got a gun that my granddad gave me. They say one day they're going to round up. Well, that shit might fly in the city. Good luck. Try that in a small town. See how far you make it down the road. Around here, we take care of our own. You cross that line, it won't take long for you to find out. I recommend you don't. Try that in a small town. So the video itself is kind of interspersed with Aldean performing in front of a building, and that building is the Maury County Courthouse in Columbia, Tennessee. And very eagle-eyed viewers noted very quickly that this was the spot of a very brutal lynch mob and lynching of a young man that went by the name Henry Choate. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Choate. And he was 18 at the time, and he was lynched and literally hung from the building. So Aldean is performing. That building is in the background, and effectively everything is, kind of footage and montage footage interspersed of it. And most of the footage that you see in the video, some of the lyrics of the song kind of hint at just crime in general, and, like a notion of like vigilante justice. If you're going to try to do bad things and hurt people, you won't get away with it in a small town. But most of the video seems to point to protests. Most of the video seems to point to people protesting in various different ways. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting is that there was a massive controversy that came from this in the wake of it, and people very quickly drew the conclusion that perhaps Jason Aldean is advocating lynch mob justice in the face of, protests, in the face of protesting cops, which has, of course, been a very controversial thing in this country the last few years in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests. And, ultimately, the video footage that was kind of like various news clips of protesters in various places, some of them were from Black Lives Matter protests, and apparently, which is very hard to do when you're dealing with YouTube, the video has been re-edited and some of those clips have been removed in the wake of the controversy that has come through here. So ultimately, in the wake of the controversy, Jason Aldean issued a statement, and he doesn't agree with anyone's assessment. Most people, not most, but a lot of people came away from watching this video thinking this was something of an incitement to violence. This was allegedly like kind of pointing to, if they're doing things that we think are objectionable, there could be lynching. So people were very triggered and very upset by what they kind of saw in this, and Aldean's impression of the song and the video is very different. And what he said is, in the past 24 hours, I've been accused of releasing a pro-lynching song, a song that has been out since May, and was subject to the comparison that I, direct quote, was not too pleased with the nationwide Black Lives Matter protests. These references are not only meritless, but dangerous. There's not a single lyric in the song that references race or points to it, and there isn't a single video clip that isn't real news footage. And while I can try and respect others to have their own interpretation of a song with music, this one goes too far. As so many pointed out, I was president at Route 91, where so many lost their lives, and our community recently suffered another heartbreaking tragedy. No one, including me, wants to continue to see senseless headlines or families ripped apart. Try that in a small town for me refers to the feeling of a community that I had growing up, where we took care of our neighbors regardless of differences of background or belief. The statement continues with, because they were our neighbors, and that was above any differences, my political views have never been something I've hidden from. And I know that a lot of us in this country don't agree on how we get back to a sense of normalcy where we go at least a day without a headline that keeps us up at night. But the desire for it that's what this song is about. So read the lyrics, watch the video, judge for yourself. Hopefully in the realm of happier news as we go forward from here. Ultimately, there is a big story that's been hiding in the ether in the world of video games for many years, and that is a game that's commonly referred to as Half-Life. For people in the world, in the arena of games, Half-Life is going to be intimately known to you. Half-Life is a game that was made by Valve, and Half-Life 2 was a game that was a sequel that was revolutionary in terms of its graphics, its design, its physics. It was just immensely fun, an incredible story, and a crazy, wild gaming experience. There was a series of kind of announced additions to the story that were called chapters, and there was basically episodes, and they had episode 1 and then episode 2. Episode 2 ends on this massive cliffhanger for the story. A whole bunch of terrible stuff happens, and then promptly from there, nothing ever happened with the franchise. And Valve said less and less and less as many, many years go on. So this was going all the way back to 2007. So we're talking 15, 16 years ago now. And there was kind of long rumors there would be, either the finishing of those episodes or Half-Life 3. And none of those things have actually happened. None of those things have taken place as since things have gone on from there. And there have been rumors and leaks and information. Maybe development had been done. Maybe development hadn't been done. No one's really sure. And ultimately, what ends up happening is it just kind of goes silent until 2020, and then a VR kind of, not exactly Half-Life 3 or any of the things that were expected, basically happened, which was called Half-Life Alyx, which was just like something within the canon of the story, and it was made for the modern crop of VR, basically headsets that were, a big part of what is the modern gaming space. Well, apparently, maybe in Gamescom, which takes place in Cologne, Germany, at Gamescom, there was essentially a little piece of information an eagle-eyed Redditor noticed, which was that there was a piece of information that perhaps leaked, that at Gamescom, there was going to be basically Valve, the company that makes Half-Life, was going to be there. And as a result, they were going to be basically perhaps showing something related to a Half-Life title. And just the mere mention of the name, just the mere indication that that might be happening had everyone excited. Maybe something's going to happen. We'll see next month when Gamescom happens. And then lastly, while all this wacky cracker stuff has been going on and everything in the world has been just kind of nuts, you've probably heard a lot about an event that's kind of been a fun little manufactured social media stunt, which is Barbenheimer. Now, the movie theater world and the world of the movies has been struggling ever since the pandemic for very obvious reasons, because who wants to be in a close, confined space with a lot of people with a highly communicable airborne virus going around? So people have been kind of ooged off of going to movies. And there's, of course, been a few exceptions in terms of, Top Gun Maverick last year and, Spider-Man No Way Home obviously did a lot to change things from that respect. And essentially, coming from that, it's been harder and harder and harder to make the kind of big box office successes that cinema enjoyed prior to the pandemic. Well, basically just this past weekend, 2 very big movies were scheduled to come out the exact same weekend, which is usually death for one movie or the other. And this was Greta Gerwig's Barbie, starring Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling as the famous toys, and in this particular movie, perhaps not so much just a toy, but also a sentient being of some respect, and Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling playing Barbie and Ken. And then Christopher Nolan, the incredible director who's basically made almost every super successful adult movie, basically every super high-minded adult movie in the last 20 years, Oppenheimer, about, the creator, the original architect creator of the atomic bomb, Robert Oppenheimer, and starring Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, and Matt Damon. Both these movies coming out the same day, the same weekend, ultimately being a part of the same release schedule. And essentially, amazingly, it became kind of its own event. The movies couldn't be more different. Barbie is, kind of like if you saw the Lego movie and instead of it being Legos, it was, Barbies, and them coming into the real world. And, I'm not going to go into too much of the plot of it. And essentially a very funny and kind of silly caper in terms of everything that was going on. And effectively, Oppenheimer is a biopic, and a very serious biopic about everything that is essentially, the creation and the plan, the time, the effort into making the first atomic bomb, and how it was a huge part of Robert Oppenheimer's life. And these movies, it became kind of this running meme across the internet. Everybody basically talking about going to see Barbenheimer, going to see Barbie and Oppenheimer on the same day in the movie theaters. And it really, really worked. A lot of people came out, and a lot of people did ultimately go to see both of these movies on the same day. A bit more for Barbie than Oppenheimer, to be sure, which isn't terribly surprising. But this is significant in respect to the movie world because Barbie did 150 million domestic in the first 3 days of its box office, and Oppenheimer did 77 million, which is apparently, and this is a surprising fact for me to learn, first time in history that the number one movie did over 100 million and the number two movie did over 50 million. So a massive success for the movie industry in a time when you've been hearing stories left, right, and center about movie theater chains going out of business and movies just in general, unless it's a superhero movie, not doing super great at the box office. So a huge hit, and a congrats to everyone that's involved. Now, for today's story, before we move on to our featured interview for this week's show, I basically wanted to talk about, kind of inspired by my experience last week and being sick and the crapulence that is that. I basically wanted to take time to tell a little story of when I was much, much younger and, what I would call a horrible, no good time. I grew up in Connecticut. Connecticut has very hot summers. It's very, very humid, and it's just one of those really oppressive things, especially if you live in a house where your family doesn't necessarily want to have the air conditioning on all the time. It can be very uncomfortable. But I remember this very particular time where it was just kind of like one of those times you just feel like you can't win. And it went from a time where in the early part of the summer, I had the flu. And so I was down for the count for almost 2 weeks straight. Awful, runny nose, the whole thing, head cold, congestion, all the awful things that are a really bad case of the flu, and just basically being down for the count. You can't do much but really kind of watch television at that point. You don't feel good. You don't feel right. And it's just abominable. And, coming from that, basically kind of inching out of that, okay, maybe things are going to be okay. And then what ended up happening was at that time in my life, our family had my aunt staying with us. She was living with us. She had a little Scottish Terrier. We have to let the dog outside so the dog could go do its business in the way that dogs do. And, it's summertime in Connecticut, a lot of stagnant water, a lot of mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are just everywhere in Connecticut. And, I don't know where you are in the world and what you've had to deal with mosquitoes. But for me personally, you get bit by a mosquito, you're going to have evidence of that bite for like a week and a half. And I mean, for several days, it's going to be itchy and terrible and uncomfortable. And I was just always really susceptible to them. It was just really common. And this was a summer where my whole family and I basically spent the better part of like 3 weeks where we just couldn't get the mosquitoes out of the house. It took us a few days before we realized the reason that they were getting in. I think it might even taken as long as a week, but this was just, I guess, a summer where there was a lot more of them than usual. And ultimately, what was happening, why there were so many mosquitoes, was because when we let the dog out to go do its business, just that 60 seconds, you have to grab the chain, put the chain on the dog's collar, let the dog run down the stairs and go do its business. 'Cause that's just how we did it in those days. The light being on, 60 seconds, the mosquitoes would just flood in. And you don't see them, you don't hear them. But then what you had was basically a period of I don't know, every night for a whole month where, you'd go to bed whenever it was that you were going to bed. And of course, me, it was like summertime from, school, being away from school. And it was like kind of that limited excitement of I'm not in school, don't have to worry about class and everything, can do what I want and watch TV if I want and stay up late or whatever. And you go to sleep, you're on your pillow, you kind of snap awake, don't see anything, try to go back to sleep. My God, the worst thing imaginable. And then you turn the light on, you start looking around the room, you can't find anything. And it was awful. At first, for the first couple nights, it was just me having to contend with it. My family thought I was crazy, and then they all had to deal with it. And that was the weird thing. I mean, most of your body's covered. The mosquito would go wherever they could, and they'd be buzzing right by your ear. And it was just this loud, high-pitched whine right in your ear. And I mean, eventually, when we were letting the dog out, we'd be able to keep the door closed or keep the light off. We were able to kind of seal the problem. But I remember one night I spent over an hour and a half kind of stalking around my room because I just couldn't get to sleep. I was so tired and I wanted to get to sleep. And effectively, then there was this moment where I finally found the mosquito and I kind of stalked it around the room. And at one point I just went, I squished it against the wall. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think I left that dead mosquito there as an effigy for almost the rest of my high school experience because it was such an awful stretch and it was so miserable. There was so little time for sleep and it was just, you just couldn't rest or be comfortable. Not long after that, kind of got that problem out of the way. Went up to, a place where my grandparents had up in, Massachusetts, a place we would go away in the summers sometimes. And another thing that was common in New England was poison ivy. There's another thing that I was really susceptible to. And I'm not going to go into the gory details, but it's awful. And it was about a 2-week kind of outbreak of it. I had to go to the doctor. They had to give me a special pill for it. It was just wretched, terrible, and embarrassing. You don't want to be out in public. You don't want to be around people. And I remember thinking after the better part of 2 months of just for one reason or another feeling like crap and going, when the hell will this end? And it was such an abominable, heartbreaking experience as one thing kind of led into the next. It was just terrible, for lack of a better term. And it was wretched and it was bad and it wasn't fun and, just lamentable in every respect of the word. And, it was a kind of thing that I remember feeling such immense anxiety because I just wondered, will there ever be a time where I'll ever be able to feel just normal again? Is this me forever? And I think I was like 14, 15 at the time. I don't know, whatever the hell I was. But am I always going to have one malady or another? Is there always going to be one irritating problem or another this entire time? Am I just never going to get to feel comfortable? Am I never going to get to feel at ease? And I think, what that experience did teach me, and it's a lesson I think I've still been learning all these decades later in life and still coming up through this week, is that these kinds of things are temporary. It's a kind of a trick your brain plays on you, right? Like you're just so unhappy with the fact that you don't feel normal and you don't feel right that it gets you into thinking maybe this is just how it is. Maybe I'll never get to be comfortable. And it's kind of the poison your brain feeds you, that automatic kind of side of your brain saying, I don't like that, I don't feel right. That other kind of gear shift that's not your persona and who you are, but that other voice saying like, I'm supposed to be a functional cognitive human. I don't feel good. I don't feel right. Maybe I'll never be okay. That's just anxiety talking. And so if you're anyone out there who has any concept of what I'm talking about, and I mean, this can go from very simple kinds of things to, chronic illnesses. It is a thing that, has been an unfortunate lesson for me in my life as I've aged and as I've gotten older. On some level, you're not 22 anymore, right? There are some things that are kind of there. You learn to live with them. You learn to deal with them. But here's the important thing for anyone listening, for anyone that this is at all useful for. This is something I had to remind myself just this past week. There will be plenty of normal times again. Yes, things like this suck. It's no fun being sick. It's no fun having any kind of malady. But doesn't mean that that's it forever. No matter what you feel, no matter what your brain's telling you, remember that this is all a small portion of what your experience is. It's not going to be this way every day all the time. There are unfortunate things like that happen, but remember, you're going to have plenty of time to feel good and to feel okay. Give yourself that patience. Allow yourself the time to heal. And on some level, grant yourself the space to just feel bad. It's okay. Sometimes you have these kinds of things happen and there's no choice. You just don't feel good. You have to live with it. You have to deal with it as long as it takes, as much as you can, but have faith in that respect that it will pass. You'll find that comfort, that balance that is you again in time. So we're going to move on to our interview segment now, with Anjali Bhamani. I want to basically sign off on the show proper now, and because we won't be coming back after the interview. But again, wanted to thank everybody for joining us here and all of the places that you do. If you watch this on Twitch, if you watch the episodes after the fact on YouTube, we post these episodes usually on YouTube the Tuesday or Wednesday afterwards, the next week. Or if you engage with us on social media, or if you engage with us in Twitter or in YouTube Shorts, any of the places that you do, we thank you so much for joining us. So we are going to be here every week, and of course, knock on wood, as long as I don't get sick again, we'll be here every week on Thursdays at 5:30 p.m. And effectively, we'll be having this same format, and we're going to be having the big headlines, and we're having our troll comment. And there's also, for the next probably 6 weeks straight, at least, there's going to be an interview that'll be the end of each broadcast. So for all of you here, stick around for now. In just a moment, we're going to have the start of that interview this week. But otherwise, thanks again for joining us. We'll be back next week. So glad to see you well.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, everyone, this is Raymond Flochat from MXDWN.com. That's Mixdown, and I'm here with the fabulous, the talented, the legendary? I'll go with legendary, Anjali Bhimani.
Hi, how you doing? That is, I don't know if you can call me legendary unless you're making a pun on Apex Legends.
No.
That I'll accept, but definitely, I don't know that I can go. I don't think I can own legendary just yet.
You go as like a graduation process. You start at Apex Legends to become legendary.
Exactly. It's like a hierarchy you got to work your way through.
Absolutely. Now, speaking with someone who's been an actor for a long time, and there's no way, given what's going on in the world right now, I couldn't ask you how you're doing and how you're feeling in the wake of the SAG strike.
Thank you for asking. What a great question to be asking, first of all, in terms of like just asking after people's feelings, because I do think that is a casualty right now that a lot of people don't realize is part of the package here. I am doing fine, overall with work, because I'm lucky enough to be working in a lot of different mediums, but it's a heavy time. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It is a very heavy time. I think making the decision to go on strike it's never ever something a union wants to do. It's never. No one wants to go on strike, and especially this one. I know our negotiators and our negotiating committee really, really did everything they possibly could to both look after their members and negotiate in earnest to try to make this work. So what I find heavy about it is that even with that much love and effort and with the extension and everything, that agreement still is so far apart. There's a big chasm between what the AMPTP wants and what SAG-AFTRA is asking for. And so that heaviness comes from realizing what a disconnect there is between those two parties. That there are so many people suffering on one side, and that the other side doesn't quite understand how that is happening. I know that there are producers and production companies that care very much and very much want this to be over, and I work with many of them regularly. So it's just it's an unexpectedly heavy time.
Yeah, I mean,
and I really, one thing that I love, among a million things that I love, but one thing that I love about actors and writers and artists in general is that part of the package when they are struggling is to help other people get through the struggle. So what is heartening to me is seeing so many people putting together benefits, and these are even people who are having trouble during the strike because they don't have work. Watching friends, I'm organizing a benefit, and everybody's putting together live streams and live performances and stuff to help each other, and not just help each other in SAG-AFTRA. I've seen a bunch of people putting together things for IATSE, people putting together things for workers who work on set, whether it's craft services or transpo. So that is very heartening to me, that there still is, underneath this very serious fight, there is this unified desire to take care of each other. And that really is at its core what I believe the strike is about. It's about taking care of other people and making sure that other people get taken care of. If it can't be even, at least fairly enough that they can own and feel valued when they go and use their talents for something to create something beautiful. It's very hard to create when you don't feel valued.
Right.
It's very hard to do that. And I don't believe that you have to do it for the love of the art. I've never believed in that. You maybe start creating things for the love of the art, but when you choose it as a profession, you should be able to choose it as a profession.
It's some people I know, as I've gone further in life, more and more people that I know that are in the game and who are affected by this. But then there's also just running an entertainment magazine, people we pay attention to or follow. And, what I notice, and this is, of course, not something that really has ever affected anything I've ever done in my life, right? Like, I don't have the specter of something like this happening and how long it could stretch out. I watch it and I'm scared. That's why I start asking a question like that, because when I look at this, it's with the AI issue on the table, I don't know how this gets resolved. I mean, I am very scared for like that the studios are basically like, no, we will not even remotely address that AI concern. Like that disparity in it, as certainly for them, and I'm not characterizing this because of any statement they've made, but like obviously they're reticent to agree to that because they're thinking how they can use it to make a lot more money in the future.
Of course.
And when I see a lot of the people out there who are striking and are protesting and, who are trying to do all the things you mentioned, there's a lot of confidence, right? Like there's a lot of, yes, we're going to win. Yes, we're going to prevail. And I'm not saying that they won't. I certainly hope that they do. But as I watch this all play out, I'm like, oh God, this is going to go on a long time.
So here's where I would offer something that maybe might help alleviate some of that fear, because this is something that I am holding on to.
Please.
I have always trusted in the creativity and the ingenuity of people to find a way through what seems like an impossible problem when they are doing it in earnest. And I do think somewhere, look, if we are a creative enough society to come up with AI, then we are a creative enough society to come up with a way to resolve this issue. Mm-hmm. That's what I believe. If we are, and especially if you're, dealing with artists who are coming together to offer something up. The biggest challenge is to, I shouldn't say the biggest challenge, but one of the challenges I do foresee is similar to what you said, which is, can we come up with something that is creative enough and versatile enough that the AMPTP is happy with the amount of profit that they can make, and we are happy enough with the protections that we have. What has happened in the past with negotiations that we very much cannot let happen this time is that when some form of new technology or innovation comes out and changes the way acting and the way writing exist in these, in media, like AI, like streaming, when those things first come on, there's always been a temptation for one side to say, well, we don't know how much money we don't know how good it's going to be, so we can't really put those in let's wait and see if it's successful. Let's wait and see if it blows up, and then we'll roll back and we'll talk about what we can do about it. I think that's happened too many times in the past.
Sure.
For either party to believe that is a valid way to work. So, but I do really have faith that if both parties come back to the table, there is a creative way, provided we can maintain respect and maintain that creativity. There is some way that we can figure out something that works out for both parties. It just, there just needs to be a willingness to be in the same room and figure it out together.
I'm not asking this because I think you have like insight into the negotiating sides of it or anything, but just purely from your own speculation, if you had to guess, how long do you think it's going to take before this comes back together?
I absolutely can't tell you. I wouldn't even venture a guess. Yeah, that was like asking, how long do you think lockdown is going to happen? How long do you think the pandemic is going to last?
Sure.
And this is, it's not a health crisis, but this is definitely something that is as serious for a lot of people, because it's their living is on the line, their ability to pay their bills is on the line, and the future of our industry is on the line. So yeah, I wouldn't even hazard a guess. I would hope that it would happen the day after both parties return to the table, but first we got to get there. Yeah, that's the first step.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, if you permit me, I'd like to go way back.
Please, right? Yes, left turn. Let's go.
We will rewind and go very far back. And I know we don't have time enough for like the expanded formulation of what this answer might mean, because it's probably a lot over the course of your life. But one of the things is I was looking into different things I wanted to talk to you about. One of the things that's really interesting to me is, and of course, whenever I speak to musicians, we talk to a lot of musicians at Mixdown, and effectively is, what brought you to this in the first place? When you think of acting and your desire for it, the passion, the drive for it, and at some point there was a thing that switched in you that said, that's where I need to be.
So I think there are two different, and it wasn't like a pivotal moment, but there are two different switches that got turned on. One is the switch that realized, oh my gosh, look at how theater, look at how acting performances, whether I'm in it or watching it, look at how that makes me feel. It was a feeling that I got nowhere else. And I would get it when I was, in fifth grade doing book reports, but I was up in front of the class doing the book report. And that there was some kind of connection that I felt then that I didn't feel anywhere else other than when I was telling stories in some form. whether it was, writing an English class or putting on the school play or whatever it was. There was that feeling. And then, so once that happened, obviously I started doing the school plays and doing wherever I could get my hands on it. But I didn't realize until high school that it was a viable thing to do as a career. Like, I hadn't connected the dots that, of course, there are people who do this for a living. I watch them on television. They are out there on Broadway. They are voicing the games that I play on my computer. It's happening. Somewhere in high school, I realized that was an option, probably because I was looking at colleges and realized, oh, there's like whole programs that I can go to. I can go to Northwestern for theater. This is amazing. And that's what I ended up doing. So once that switch was turned on, there was no stopping it.
Wow.
Because I think one of the biggest obstacles for people, particularly maybe with their families or with their communities when they're trying to go into the arts, is, oh, well, how are you going to make a living? Oh,
right.
Well, this is really hard. But once I realized, I just like any other profession, I can train and then I can enter the workforce. And that's kind of for me, that was as matter of fact as it went. Now, I understand that for most people, it's not that matter of fact in terms of how they see it. But for me, it was, because my family was very education oriented. So you want to do something, you train to be really, 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 really good at it. You put all your effort into it and you make a living. That's how you do it. And so, yeah, once that switch was turned on, there was no question of whether or not this would be what I wanted to do. There was also no question of, oh, I may have to quit at some point. But because I know a lot of actors run into that when they're questioning, because there are long stretches of time between gigs many times. And I never understood, for me, the idea of quitting acting, because as far as I'm concerned, it's one of the most wonderful fields in the sense that I can act until I'm 95. Like, I can act until I die. This is like, the only thing I have to do to keep acting is not die. The bar is low. In terms of actually making a living and being successful in whatever ways you consider successful, whatever
Sure.
benchmarks you find, that's where the difficulty lies. But yeah, it's been a very matter of fact thing for me. And thankfully, whenever I have the moments that I've lost faith, or the moments that I've maybe been down about it, I have always had a tremendous support system around me, whether it is my family or my friends or the community around me. My manager, God bless her, I've been with her for 16 years, and she has believed in me more than I have believed in myself many times. Yeah, I've been very, very fortunate to build this wonderful team of humans around me that don't let me fall.
So, I mean, as you've been going through this progression and all the different things you've done, and from my understanding, you started a little bit more with theater before you kind of started doing TV and movies and then video games. And I mean, you mentioned it kind of like how a lot of people do. Like, it's very, very hard to make it in acting, right? Like, it's very, very hard to get to the point where you make a sustainable living, never mind the strike and all the things that means to everything right now. But I mean, for you, it sounds like, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so certainly correct me wherever you feel the need to, but it sounds like for you, there wasn't really I'm doing this as long as I can be successful at it, financially speaking.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
That was never, partly because, again, my parents, God bless them, not only were they supportive in that they loved, my parents are doctors who met acting in medical school. So it was already like the arts were in our family. But my parents, regardless of what I did, they said, whatever you want to do, great, be really good at it and be able to make a living at it. As long as you love it, you can make a living at it and you're good at it, knock yourself out. And so, again, it was a very matter of fact thing. And part of what I think has, I don't want to say made it easier for me, because it's not been easy, but part of the equation of that was saying yes to storytelling in as many forms as I possibly could. Which is why the career that you were talking about has so many different branches of that tree, because any chance I've gotten to be able to work in a new medium, I've been excited to. There's never been, oh, I don't want to do that. Oh, I don't want to do commercials. I don't want to do that. There's never been that moment. There's been, ooh, wow, there's another way. Cool. I'm allowed to do this. This is amazing.
Right.
And so that has been very exciting to me. And that's also where innovation and the movement forward in terms of technology and in terms of all the stories we can tell and how we can tell them, that's actually been a wonderful thing, because there's been more opportunity to create just in different ways. And each one of those different ways has a different way of touching the viewer or touching the player.
Right.
So each one of them has a beauty unto itself. And so, yeah, it's always been well, I need to make a living, so I'm going to make a living.
Are you familiar with Rick Rubin?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
My husband is also a musician, so
Okay,
he's the bass player for a band called Vintage Trouble. So Rick Rubin is like in our family very
highly regarded.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, because I have to ask because, if you're not a music person, a lot of people have no idea who he is,
Unless you watched Dave, people know who. If you watched Dave,
Yeah, sure, of course. And I mean, effectively, he's on a book tour right now, and he's basically written a book about, and it's mostly like artistic ramblings, right?
Yeah,
like
the creative process. Right?
Exactly. And one of the things he's been saying a lot in interviews, and it's certainly easy to say if you're working with big famous things that make you tons of money, but his point was, don't do anything because you think you're going to be profitable at it. Do it because that's what you are and that's what you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
That was essentially the point he's been making to anyone that would listen. He's like, make sure that you're satisfied first with what you're creating, and then worry about the rest of it after that.
And that right there, that interpretation is where I think people, that is what I believe is the correct interpretation of you have to do it for the love of the art. But the problem is a lot of people say you have to do it for the love of the art, whether you make money or not. And I think that, again, like that, you don't go in it to be rich. You don't go in it. I mean, some people have, but I don't believe that is the most creatively fulfilling way to do it.
Mm.
Obviously there are sacrifices you make. There are choices that you make when you sometimes want to do something that's artistically fulfilling, but perhaps not profitable. We all make those decisions in our lives. The same people who do engineering internships and don't get paid, but they get all this wonderful experience. But that's a lot of times that's a play for people, or a lot of times that's something else. But you do have to start with a fire. At least I do. I don't know about other people. I have to start with a fire that is more than my bank account. When it is a necessity to pay the bills, it's a necessity to pay the bills. But even then, I know that I can't squeeze my acting so hard. I cannot walk into an audition desperate to pay my bills.
Right.
And I think it's important for all artists to really, really own that it doesn't matter how you pay your bills. If it is ethical and legal and morally conscionable, do the needful so that you can be creative.
Right.
So that you can be free to do that. And you're not thinking when you go into that audition room, oh boy, well, I got to do anything that I possibly can because I don't know how I'm going to make the rent. I think that is very stifling.
Right.
But also it can be for some people, not for me, but I know that it can be for some people very galvanizing. I know that for some people it's, create a problem, solve a problem, as my father-in-law says. If you got something to do, you're going to find a way to fix it. You're going to find a way to do it. Sure. Parents know all about that. You're going to find a way to feed your kids no matter what. Right.
Sure.
And so, but the creative process, I do think, needs to come from a fire that's a little bigger than that. For me, that fire comes from really recognizing how much of a service it can be to people, how much storytelling through the ages has been used. We have tomes from the ancient Greeks about the arts, about having that catharsis and how necessary that is to society, to be able to have that in there. And for me to be able to use this crazy vessel that I was put into by whatever forces out there in the world, I don't know what's out there, but this vessel that happens to be particularly in touch with their emotions and have a imagination that is particularly active. If I've been given this particular vessel, then I want to use it to be able to take people on journeys that they haven't been able to go on before and that they might never be able to go on. My job is to look at you and say, I got you. Don't worry about it. You sit there. I'm going to do the heavy lifting. I'm going to do the crying. I'm going to do the laughing. I'm going to do all of the experiencing, essentially, of this thing that we're going to go through together. And at the end of our time together, your life is still intact. You are safe. You are home or in your seat or wherever you are. But we had an experience together that may have expanded you a little bit and may have shown you the world in a different way, that may have just entertained you and brought you some levity in life when you're feeling dark. That is it's such a powerful thing. And I think that's what I felt when we were talking about, those first two times that I felt like this is why I'm doing it.
Right.
That feeling of elation, that feeling of watching a musical and not knowing why a particular note is making me leak out my eyeballs. Like there's something about it. There's a power about it that can't be denied. And that for me, that gets you through the tough times. Knowing that someone out there might watch this movie, play this game, see this performance, and have some kind of a sea change inside them. Yes. that expands them a little bit and takes them back into their lives a little bigger than they were. That's just like that's gold. That's way more than the paycheck. That's way more than anything else. That's the stuff that keeps you going, and that's the stuff that makes it fun to find new ways to create, because it means you're finding new ways to touch people's hearts, and that's exciting.
So, I mean, let me attempt to connect all the threads of the things we've discussed
Sure.
here. So let's see if I can go like
and this is such a fun conversation. I think I can push us a little bit longer, if that's okay with Grace and Kat. Yes,
that's cool.
Okay, cool. Let's I think I can get. All right, dope. Yeah. I think I have like 10 more minutes.
Okay, all right.
And then I have to run.
Okay, no problem. We'll go as long as we can, and then you just give me the hook. So basically, to the point, and not to go back to the strike thing in any way, but just to make that case, right? Like, you're talking about the way that it can move people, touch people, influence them, inspire them. And I mean, this is a part of that inherent value in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, ultimately, that people consume a crap ton of entertainment in this country, right? Like, it isn't like it isn't
and around the world. I mean, look, my family comes from India, so Bollywood and Tollywood and all of the film industry over there is ginormous.
Right.
People in all financial positions will go to see a movie in India.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, with all of that, like you talked about, you've connected the different mediums, different art forms, and those people get different things from them, whether you're talking about theater and that experience and feeling, and, feeling someone right in front of you, movies or television, which can be passive in their own ways, or video games, which are super active and engaged. So you talked a little bit about what they get from it. And the question that I wanted to ask you is, and then I'm going to go into some other things and some of the more actual play content that you do. Ultimately, what do you get from it? When you do these different kinds of things, how does it change from voice acting to like theater to like, on screen? What is it like for you? What's different for you between those mediums?
Well, what's different in terms of doing them, or what's different in terms of what I get, like the reward that I get?
The latter part.
It's exactly what I just talked about. There's this reward of getting to take people on a journey. There's this feeling of like, wow, I might have, and especially getting to meet people at conventions and being able to talk with them and hear it directly from them. When you know that a scene that you did or a character that you portrayed helped someone feel empowered or helped someone through a dark time, there is this tremendous sense of efficacy and agency that it brings you as a human being. There is also, I mean, one of the luxuries I feel like we have as actors and artists is that part of our job is self-exploration, which means the stuff that a lot of people have to do outside of their 9-to-5 job or outside of whatever the job there is, whether they do therapy or some other thing, that's part of the package for what we do. We get to go through all of those things. We get to explore all of those things. So what especially at this point in my career, because I've been doing it so long, it just brings me this huge appreciation of the complexity of life, and this huge appreciation of no matter what you go through, there is value for it. There's value to it, because in the darkest moments that I have felt, part of what has helped me get through them is knowing someday this is going to serve me, because I'm going to have compassion for someone else going through it. Not it's going to serve me as an actor. That is a choice. That's one way to look at it. But just understanding that this is part of life, and someone somewhere may need that from me. It's why I wrote my book. I very much wanted to let people know you're not alone. People go through things. The people you think are the most successful and the happiest and their lives are blessed have been through things similar to you. And even if my journey is not exactly the same as your journey, even if our paths are very unique and very disparate, you are not alone, because I am here and I am witnessing it with you. And I am standing next to you, and I am here to crack a joke or sing a song or help you by telling you my experiences. But one way or another, you're not alone on that path.
Right.
That sense of community that happens when you're storytelling in any form is very, very engaging and very, very fulfilling in a way that I don't feel with other things that I do in my life that I could
So,
have done for a living, but I chose this weapon of choice as the way to achieve my purpose. And I really do think that the purpose I tend to live by is letting people know they're not alone.
I like that term weapon of choice in describing
Yeah.
this. And, one of the things that, I wanted to cover with you is, how I first heard of you. The first time I ever saw you in anything, it was on Deadwood, of course, coming to the
Mm.
Critical Role people.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've always had, I think, a comparable relationship with watching and viewing entertainment that I think a lot of people do. For me, it's always been as very simple as, do I believe it? Right? Like, did I
Yeah.
believe that that happened? And that might be a super minimalistic way of looking at a very complex art form. But, my experience when I watched on Deadwood, and specifically as it pertained to things that you and Matt and Kari Payton did on that show, as you were bringing that all to bear, when that came to its finale, whenever it
Mm.
was, when, Kari's character basically said, I'm going to murder you, I visibly
Spoiler
got,
alert.
yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry,
Okay.
internet. It's been out for 3 years.
It's been on for like 4 years, so
Yeah,
fine.
it's been out there. Hopefully by now
But
you've
yes,
seen it. But yeah,
but yes.
ultimately, when that finale comes to pass, I visibly in my chair felt scared, right? Like, and something in the way the three of you brought that together, and of course, Kari specifically, there was something
Mm.
that it kind of hit me in that moment that not that an appreciation, I always had a deep appreciation for anybody who does this because I don't think I could, right? Like, ultimately, the just something in how powerfully that was brought forth and how much, like, if it wasn't like, oh, I know I'm watching a show on the internet with a set,
Mm-hmm.
I swear to God, I think he would have murdered him right there. Like, it really
Mm.
felt like that to me.
Yeah.
And that was the kind of thing that was a part of why, we've always covered entertainment here at this magazine, but this is why I've gone further in this direction since, was literally stemming from that moment, because it was how did someone do that? Right? Like,
Mm.
I don't get the sweet science of that. I've spent my whole life analyzing music, and I can then tell you like what sound is wrong here or how that bridge or chorus
Mm-hmm.
wasn't constructed correctly. But how did I really believe that he wasn't Kari Payton, the very sweet man who's obviously very intelligent and kind, but like someone who would happily murder someone in cold blood? And that's the
Yeah.
part that I haven't been able to connect the wires on.
Well, I don't think you're supposed to.
Yeah.
I think that's the secret sauce that Rick Rubin is trying to bring out in people. Is that part that you can't explain. I do think tabletop role-playing games are unique into themselves in terms of the way that they enable people who are playing them, whether they are actors like we are or whether they're people at home, the way that they enable the player to inhabit a character and inhabit a story and not know what's going to happen next, because the dice are going to determine that. Even the dungeon master or the game master has no idea what's going to happen next.
Mm-hmm.
But that commitment to story and that commitment to your characters that we are taught to do in theater school and in acting school, but it's someone else's script. When it's your words and your creation and your script, and you are that invested in it, and you have been in this character for this prolonged period of time, not necessarily like like that we were playing the game the whole time we were playing the game, right? So you're in that the whole time. I think there is a giving over of like, you don't, it's not that you check out of your own self and you're suddenly, you are this character. I don't think we do that, but there's definitely a combination of that character and you where the lines are a little blurred. And those feelings and those moments just they do happen. They're gold. And I'm happy to say that at this point in my career, I know they're not lightning in a bottle. I used to think and especially when I was a less capable actress, I had a really hard time finding those moments. And now for me, I've figured out the ways to let go of all the fears, let go of all the concerns of what you look like, let go of anything else, because nothing matters more than the story.
Right.
Because that story is the thing that's going to affect people. It's not what you look like. It's not how you say a particular word. It's your commitment to the truth in that moment that is going to elicit exactly what you just said, which is, do I believe it or not? Because do I believe it is really, in my opinion, what I interpret it as is, am I going to invest in this? Is this worth me investing my heart in this? Is this worth me giving over my tears as an audience member?
Mhm.
Is this worth my opening myself up and being vulnerable? And when the actors are doing that for the story, I think it is easier for the audience to be able to do that. So obviously, when you have actors like Matthew Mercer and Kari Payton and so many of the amazing people that I've been blessed enough to work with and to call friends, like that certainly makes it a lot easier.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't think you're supposed to know how it happens. You're just supposed to trust that it does, and that it's not once in a blue moon, and that it's not just like, oh, it might happen, it might not. No, it's there. You just have to really crack yourself open to it.
Before we run out of time, and just in terms of segueing off here, I just wanted to ask, in terms of Undeadwood and what that was and the characters you all put together, has there ever been any discussion about whether through something more of Undeadwood or even anything else, moving those characters on, doing more with those characters?
There hasn't been any discussion of it. I think it was a kind of a perfect thing unto itself, and
Sure.
and we've all moved on from it. And there are so many more. There's so many other stories to tell with other people, with other creators, and obviously Critical Role has, they have brought in so many exceptional people, not just to their main campaign, but to the side stories that they're doing, and other companies. I mean, we have got Dimension 20. We've got so many people. We've got Basic Quest coming up that is so dear to my heart because it's something that we've created specifically for the South Asian gaming community, not for the South Asian gaming community, but to represent it and to show people that this traditionally Eurocentric game system, it works for everyone. Come to this party.
Sure.
Come to the party of this culture, please. But we'll explain it to you. Come on in. This is awesome. That's what inclusivity is about. Come to the party.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there are so many other stories that are worth being told, that one will live in and of what itself, what it was for itself, and we have other things to move on to. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. That makes me a little sad because I was hoping for more at some point.
I would love to know what happens after after that condition of Kari's in the game wears off. I would have loved to know, but I think at this point I can't speak for anybody else, but I suspect that is the case.
Gotcha.
There are so many amazing stories to be told, and there will be more stories that are as touching as that one was, and as rewarding as that one was. I promise you.
Fair enough. I assume we're about out of time, so should I just ask one more?
Yeah, go ahead.
You sure?
Let's see what happens. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. So obviously, you and several other folks from Critical Role have Candela Obscura that you've been doing recently. And so here's my thing. I think I had a comparable gap that I've heard you mention in other interviews, where I played D&D when I was 12, 13, 14, and then kind of stopped for a very, very long time. And, came back to it in the last 5-6 years, and, and really enjoying where it's at as a thing. And, it's D&D is itself, whether it was in the 90s or the 80s or now, is complicated, right? It's not like a thing you can just do with
it's crunchy.
It's crunchy. There's a lot of rules, and there's a lot of different things. And of course, that's what, the Dungeon Master's for. Like, they're to help you. So there's certainly mechanisms to make that easier, but it's its own challenge, right? Now, Critical Role has lots of different kinds of content. Sometimes it's in D&D, but sometimes it's in other things. And this, because it's in this new kind of game tool set that they have. Here is my thing, and I have a lot of trouble following it. Now, that might be not the acting, not the story, that in the kind of the place,
the mechanics. You have trouble following the mechanics.
Yes, and I mean, it's not.
Yeah, well, that makes perfect sense. It's a brand new language.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a brand new language, and part of the job of the show. And I hope I should let you ask your question, and then I'll fill that.
No, you were about on the tip of it. I mean, basically, so I spent time trying to learn and follow, because there were videos that kind of gave basics of it, and it was like, wow, my brain must be so married to D&D's mechanics that I have trouble kind of separating myself. So what I was going to ask is effectively, how long did it take you and the rest of the players? How long did that take in terms of prep to get you to the point? Because you don't look like you're struggling with it. You look like you've got it as well as anything else.
Well, just like D&D, it's an open book test with other people. So you can not know what you're doing, and we'll figure it out in the moment, because we all have the book, we all have the rules, we all are asking each other. I think, well, first of all, part of the job of the show is not just to entertain, it's to help other people know about this game system and help other people start to understand it. And it will continue to be that as this season ends and then the next one happens, and when you have new characters and whatnot. I that is part of the job of the show, is to make it easier. I also think it'll be easier when the full rule book comes out, because there'll be a lot more context. But for us, we had one like learn the game session, and then we jumped into session 0 to like get our characters playing, and that was it.
That
And we were
quickly.
like, you're in. And the play test before session 0, we weren't even playing. We were playing completely different characters. I was playing a character that I think I named like, what did I name him? Boogie Smalls. Like, I made a comic character, like, that had nothing to do with Charlotte, like a very ridiculous. And I learned very quickly, okay, this is probably not the gameplay system to be playing a comic character. Let's maybe not do that. But yeah, it was a very quick study system. And I'm while it might be hard to follow as a viewer, I do think it's significantly easier than D&D to play as a player.
Interesting.
Because there are less mechanics and there are less things to learn, and it's much more about the storytelling than it is about the rules. And you're just using a few d6, and it's not necessarily as complicated as D&D or other gaming systems, Shadowrun, and like the ones that are very much like you got to read you don't have to read the whole book, but you kind of want to read the whole book because it's this giant book with all of these tables and stuff. This one, it doesn't operate that way. It feels, or it felt at least, like it was much more about the story, and also like giving into, unlike D&D, where you got the option for raising the dead and reincarnation spells and all of this stuff. Like, there are very real feeling consequences to your actions. And there's so many other game systems that do the same thing, whether it's the Outbreak Undead that we did with We're Alive Frontier, and that's a very permadeath exists in that world.
Sure.
I think in this one there is a deep investment in not being reckless, even though we obviously on the show we made some really stupid choices, but not being reckless to the point of like, well, I know someone can bring me back, so I'm just going to do this thing. There's an investment in the actual story that keeps you engaged that way, just like I would be in real life. And so that I very much dig, and I hope the audience does too, because I feel like when you might lose a character, you might lose an actor in the show, you kind of like really invested in them not going away.
Sure. And I think where I'll end with, and because I'm sure you've got to go as an actor in doing something as dark as this, because it's pretty dark, right? Like, it's in that very like kind of steampunk gothic horror kind of varietal of things, and it's quite frankly darker than I usually go, right? Like,
yeah. Darker than I usually go. I am not a horror genre person.
Me neither. I've never enjoyed being scared. It's just never worked for me, and I don't know what that says about me, but that's a whole other story. But when you're going to a place like that as a part of a story like this, does that make it harder in terms of bringing apart that secret sauce that we were talking about before? Or is it just another flavor of this is what the job is? Is it harder to be in such a dark place?
For me personally, it's the same investment.
No.
It's the exact, I care as much about this character as I care about any other character that I play. Okay. Every time whether it's an audition or whether it's a job or whether it's a game or whatever, I fall in love with the character I'm playing, and then I have to let them go.
Yeah.
And that's part of both the joy and the sort of tragedy every time you get to do something like this, is you fall in love and then you let it go. And but that again is the really special thing about storytelling in all of these different mediums, because they don't exist. That moment doesn't exist in perpetuity. That moment does go away, and that to me makes it more valuable.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's punk rock. It's a happening.
But no, I think it's just different circumstances applied with the same level of commitment.
Fantastic. Well, then we should
Yeah.
probably leave it there. I have about like 50 more questions, but we would be here till dawn. So,
And also my computer's about to die, and I'm going to have to find my power. So I was worried we were going to lose you like right in the middle of that question. That would have been tragedy. I'll tell you what, we can do this again sometime if you're interested. I would very much like to, because this has been a great conversation, and I love your questions. Your questions are really, thank you for being so insightful with your questions.
This is my pleasure. I mean, hey, and anytime I can do this in the Captain America sense all day.
Without a shield and a tight suit. I love it.
Yeah, I don't think you want to see me in a tight suit or a shield.
I just feel like you're more comfortable than he is. He doesn't look comfortable to me.
That's a fair point. And, that whole knight in shining armor thing definitely fits with the way I kind of approach everything. So there you go. I'm with that.
Well, there you go. Good. I like it.